All right, guys. So what we've done, we've got it all the way to 1941. Before I move on with this slide, I just want to make sure you understand. As a historian, we can talk about battles all we want, but once the United States gets involved in this war, I think on this side of history, we realize the Allies have now secured victory. The United States had far too much wealth, far too many resources, and far too many men. It offset this global balance of power and really tilted the war towards the Allies. And that's going to be one of those things that when we get to the end of the war, I really think we have to manage that and measure that. But now what we're going to look at, we're going to look at the turning points of the Second World War in Europe. We're going to look at El Alamein. And Winston Churchill believed El Alamein was the biggest turning point, was the greatest battle. But now we're going to look. Then we look at Stalingrad, where most historians believe that's where the German Wehrmacht runs out of energy. Let's kind of look at it. Battle of El Alamein is only 20, 30 miles outside of the Suez Canal. The Erwin Rommel had been pushing towards. Here's El Alamein. Here's the Suez Canal. If they get the Suez Canal, the war is very different. If the Germans are able to shut down the Suez Canal, the war is, again, very different. Erwin Rommel has been identified as the greatest of the generals in all of World War II by some military experts. Erwin Rommel was able to do more with less. By this time, Hitler had been focusing on Operation Barbarossa, so Erwin Rommel was really focusing just on the Afrika Korps or his tank unit. Bernard Montgomery is the British general. The British love to romanticize Bernard Montgomery. They identify him as the greatest general. If I had to pick the two, I think Erwin Rommel is probably more important. But again, everybody likes to talk about Bernard Montgomery as well. Bernard Montgomery will have a smashing victory at the Second Battle of El Alamein in November. And here's what, this, I like this little photograph. It just kind of looks at it. This is what the Battle of El Alamein looked like. These guys are on a machine gun. These are British guys. Gosh, can you imagine trying to fight a war in the middle of a desert? There's tanks, there's machine guns. That's just crazy. But the importance of the Battle of El Alamein is the Germans are not only stopped from capturing the Suez Canal, Erwin Rommel is forced into a retreat. And unfortunately for Erwin Rommel and the Nazis, George Patton, a U.S. dude, is landing his armored divisions in North Africa. So it's gonna so if we draw this line over here, here's the Atlantic, here is where Patton is, here's where Montgomery is, and they're gonna do that pincher movement where they're gonna pop Rommel like a pimple. And it's only a matter of months before North Africa is secure. So El Alamein is an important moment. It demonstrates the full extent of the Nazi domination of the the North Africa theater. But more importantly is the Battle of Stalingrad. And again, if you talk to any military historian, I would be shocked if they don't say that this is not the most important battle. But from August 1942 to February 1943, this is the moment it all comes down to. Stalin ordered the end of scorched earth. By this point, it was very similar when Napoleon was invading. The Germans were burning all their resources. The Russians were retreating, burning resources, and goading the Germans into the heart of Russia so the winter would cross. Pretty shockingly, the German Wehrmacht, the Sixth Army, was able to get all the way to Stalingrad, which is on the Ural Mountains. If you remember that from your summer assignment, the Ural Mountains. It was a pretty rapid growth, and Stalingrad was a new city caused by the 5-year plans. And Stalin said, "We're no longer retreating. Stand and fight." Because he did not want to lose his namesake. He believed that if Stalingrad collapsed, that would be devastating to the morale of the Soviet Union. Now, as we get closer, as we get to November 1942, as the Nazis begin to continue the Sixth Army begins to fight, the Russians are able to hold off. It's a stalemate. But the Wehrmacht actually froze. It was the coldest winter of the 20th century, from what I understand, and the oil in the war machines actually froze. So now it became, instead of technology, which is interesting, we'll see this a little bit later, instead of technology, it became a soldier versus soldier war. And because of that, more than likely, the Soviets definitely did have soldiers who could do more with less. And the Soviets were able, by February 1943, the Soviets were able to gain victory. But again, it's a major victory. The Germans, the whole Sixth Army is destroyed. The Germans are no longer, they're going to be on a retreat from here on out. But this is what Stalingrad now looks like at the outcome. A once industrial metropolis, if you will, is no longer. It's completely destroyed. But this is the cost of victory. For the first time in the war, the Germans were on retreat. And I think it's pretty obvious when we look at this. El Alamein is a cute battle. It's an important battle. But the reason Churchill wants to over-romanticize it, it's a British victory. In reality, Stalingrad really is the moment in which we see the Germans had been overextended, and with the United States participating, they are on the verge of losing. And this leads us right to the last years of the war, 44 to 45. June 6, 1944, it's D-Day. D-Day is the day in which the U.S. and British, it's an amphibious invasion of France. It is the whole purpose is to create a second front on Germany so that the German forces would be forced out of Russia faster. Stalin really demanded this. Stalin really wanted it in 1943. We're going to talk a little bit about the disagreement about this at Tehran soon. It's a really bloody day for the U.S. troops. Unfortunately, we lost the lottery here. The British, where they were able to, they were a couple miles north of where we landed, and there were literally no German troops there. The Germans had predicted Omaha Beach was where they're going to be, where we're going to land, and it was a deadly day. But despite it being a deadly day, it was a major victory. Despite the great loss of men, the Allies successfully opened the Western Front. And if you wanted to check out a movie, Saving Private Ryan, the first 20 minutes is about D-Day. Now, April 1945, the Battle of Berlin. The Soviets now were on the verge of marching into Berlin. It devastated Berlin. And again, look at this image. Clearly not as bad as Stalingrad, but this is a really emptied out town. Berlin was the most populated city in the northern part of Europe, and it is going to be a devastated city. On April 30th, Hitler does commit suicide with his wife, Eva Braun, and there's some weird stuff about that. She was only 18 years old. I do think he wasn't really into the sexual aspect of marriage. He was more of the father figure. He wanted that marriage to represent him and him as the father of Germany. Really weird stuff. But he and her on their marriage day do commit suicide together. There's a part of the occult. If you die at the same moment, you enter the afterlife together. Weird stuff. Very weird. And after May 7th, as the Germans fully surrender, we now have what we call May 8th is Victory in Europe Day. Very important day. Now we feel like, hey, the Allies have now won here in Europe. Now the United States can focus on Japan. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Now, Europe, 1945. This is the city of Dresden. I'm gonna let you sit and look at this photograph for a second. And this is caused by the United States bombing of Dresden. If you want to know about war crimes, I definitely encourage you to check out Dresden. This is a extra battle, if you will. Dresden was not a center of Nazism, but the United States decided to use, I believe it was napalm here. Check that out if you wanted to, you can. But with that, I want to point out all parts of Europe are destroyed. 20 million Europeans dead, twice as many as the First World War. What do you think is going to happen to Europe? I want to point out, Europe is a power vacuum. World War II, think about World War I and World War II. If we connect them, it is very eerily similar to the 30 Years' War. I think the big argument, though, is instead of the 30 Years' War just destroying Germany, World War I and World War II destroying Europe. Europe is now becoming a power vacuum. And who are the two most powerful countries? Of course, the United States and the Soviet Union. And we're going to talk about that later as we unfold. But I also want you to ponder what's going to happen to the European empires. Decolonization, and we're going to skip over that before the AP test, but we're going to come back to it before the SOL. But the Europeans are going to, the once great European empires are going to collapse. England, France, Germany, the great top tier countries are now going to be second tier. And we're going to talk more about that as we go through it. But again, Europe 1945 is more different than it's ever been in our class. I hope that makes sense to you guys.